Vecna, Eve of Ruin is an official adventure module book in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This video reviews the book and offers a few ideas about possibly modifying the adventure. I will try to avoid major spoilers here. The adventure is intended for characters to start at level 10 and continue up through level 20. The book opens with a few sentences that I found to be most important for understanding the intentions of the book. This adventure celebrates 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons history. The history spans many beloved settings and wondrous planes of existence. Its cast includes characters iconic to longtime fans. The adventure's stakes involve the fate of all worlds, in other words, the multiverse. In my view, the narrative story is enjoyable as a short novel with plentiful artwork to illustrate the characters, the places, and the major plot points. The main challenge for the creative team was to find a way to include as many as possible of the most famous campaign settings, non-player characters, and adventuring themes that have characterized Dungeons & Dragons over the last decades. Secondarily, if the adventure will be at levels 10 through 20, then indeed the threat level should be as high as this case of threatening the fate of all worlds. The solution was for the characters to use a magical portal to visit into various worlds, planes of existence, or essentially campaign settings. The characters undertake a classic multi-part fetch quest to find the pieces of the legendary Rod of 7 Parts. A multiverse portal brings the characters into Eberron and into the Dragonlance world of Kryn. The characters will meet Lolth in the Demon Web, and they will meet Strahd van Zarovich in Barovia. The structure of the adventure could be especially enjoyable for people coming to the game for the first time, or maybe with a little bit of knowledge about some but not all of the pre-existing campaign settings. I would encourage in a session 0 to ascertain if your group will prefer to start at level 1 with extra content, or else to jump into the story at level 10 as written in the official book. As you might anticipate, each chapter of the book is different, intended as a tour of the multiverse of Dungeons & Dragons. The printed book is about 250 pages and it contains everything for this adventure as written. You easily could use any single chapter as a stand-alone adventure. Or you could grab your favorite parts and drop them into a different adventure. For these purposes, most dungeon masters are familiar with modifying the specific details and circumstantial context of a pre-written adventure. I can guess that the creators of Vecna, Eve of Ruin probably expected for people to modify in this fashion, such as with some of the examples that I will offer in this video. I like multi-part fetch quests. In my approach, I create a series of fantastic locations that are unique and memorable environments for each part of the quest. For each location, I prepare a list of possible natural hazards, traps, puzzles, friends, and enemies. Depending on the character level at each point, I will adjust the specific details of each encounter, and I will adjust the difficulty class and challenge rating accordingly. In the pre-written adventure book of Vecna, Eve of Ruin, the creative team needed to plan for the specific character level during each part or chapter. The easiest solution here is to start with recovering the base end of the Rod of 7 Parts when characters are at a known character level. The base piece of the rod will unlock the location of the next adjoining part of the rod, and the characters will gain 1 level for this next chapter. Thereafter, each next segment of the rod will point to the following connected part, along with a known level of the characters for each chapter. You might be wondering how the Rod of 7 Parts relates to the Lich, Vecna, or to the title of this adventure, Vecna, Eve of Ruin. In my understanding, the intention of this book was to include Vecna as probably the game's most famous primary antagonist, and to include many other famous non-player characters as part of the celebration of the multiverse of Dungeons & Dragons. These aspects of the book probably were most difficult for the creative team to manage. In my view, the non-player characters made this adventure campaign feel more like a fictional novel about those non-player characters, such as when reading the many stories about the Forgotten Realms or in the Dragonlance series. You could remove all of those non-player characters and even remove Vecna from this campaign, and then still use the different multiverse portal locations for a multi-part fetch quest of the Rod of 7 Parts. Alternatively, if you want to retain Vecna as the central antagonist, then you could make the quest about finding 7 pieces of the legendary Sword of Cass as a known weapon specifically for defeating Vecna. Another idea is that the characters are in a race to stop Vecna from finding all of the pages of an arcane tome or grimoire or all of the cards in the deck of many things. The official version of Vecna, Eve of Ruin, does not appear to contradict anything in the game history and lore about Vecna the Lich, about the hand and eye of Vecna, or about Cass who betrayed Vecna and defeated him with the Sword of Cass. In this new adventure, Vecna has started another evil plan involving the stealing of secrets as a kind of magical ingredient that Vecna can use in a powerful ritual that will remake all of reality into his own version. When the characters are at level 10, they interrupt a lesser ritual event, and by accident, they end up becoming linked psychically to Vecna. Although Vecna is unaware of the mind link, despite being famous for his supreme intellect and mental powers. Through the mind link, the characters gradually will learn some of the magical secrets that Vecna knows, thereby allowing for 2 things. First, the characters can learn some of the key information about the history and lore behind what has happened and what is happening now. Second, the characters can accumulate secrets as a kind of expendable resource. They could spend a secret and then forget about it, while they all gain advantage on d20 rolls for the next 1 minute. Alternatively, the characters could stockpile their secrets and unload them later when attempting to stop Vecna during the reality-altering ritual at the climax of the adventure. I would not use these aspects about the mind link or about these secrets. Instead, I would imagine that Vecna will learn that the characters have been fighting against his cultists and starting to interfere with his grand plans to change all of reality. At least once during each chapter of the adventure, I would make Vecna taunt the characters, attempt to exploit aspects of their backstories and motivations, and make them suspicious about each other. Vecna could use the Dream spell or Astral Protection. He could send groups of minions, cultists, and hunters. He could dominate other creatures to act on his behalf and speak with his voice. Meanwhile, Vecna could collect more of the magical ingredients for his ritual, and he might even perform a test of the reality-altering ritual at a smaller scale. I would modify even more to imagine that Vecna is not looking for secrets per se, but instead he is looking for the pieces of the Sword of Cass. Vecna wants to find these pieces before Cass or anyone else can assemble this deadly weapon linked to a prior defeat of Vecna. Furthermore, Vecna wants to use the power of the sword and convert it into an energy source for his reality-altering ritual. In the adventure as written for Vecna Eve of Ruin, the quest for the Rod of 7 Parts was intended as a way to stop Vecna. The plan was devised not by the player characters, but rather by a group of famous non-player characters in the history and lore of Dungeons & Dragons. These non-player characters are super powerful equivalents of demigods, but for whatever reasons they want to send the characters on this quest. They became aware of Vecna's plan for a reality-altering ritual, and now they rely on the characters to find the pieces of the Rod of 7 Parts as a last hope for stopping Vecna. I would modify the parts about the quest givers. Generally, I prefer for quest givers and other allies to act only in minor roles. I often will tune down their power level. Most importantly, I make sure that the player characters always are at the center of the decisions and the actions. The antagonists and the villains should be more powerful than the player characters, at least at the beginning of an adventure, and they should be enacting a plot. The player characters can react and make decisions that will affect what will happen next, and likewise the antagonists will react and adjust. Unlike the antagonists and the villains, however, the quest givers and allies never should overshadow the player characters in the major decisions or in the course of the action. In some cases, I might allow for the roles of the non-player characters instead to be occupied by the player characters. In the adventure of Vecna, Eve of Ruin, perhaps the player characters become part of a council of scholars and other heroes working on how to defeat Vecna. If the characters will start at level 10, then maybe they already occupy positions of authority in the council. If they will start at level 1, as I would prefer, then the characters would be more like apprentices in the council. During a Session 0, I would present the characters with options about a personal mentor for each character individually. The options could include any of the famous non-player characters, such as Elminster, Mordenkainen, Tasha, Alustriel Silverhand, and others. I might even include traditionally evil options, such as Cass, who at this point in time would want to defeat Vecna once again and certainly would want to use the Sword of Cass as his choice of the ideal weapon to defeat Vecna. You easily could change the names and attributes of the non-player characters to be suitable in your campaign. In the official book as written, the non-player characters attempted to cast a multi-part wish spell, but they failed. Their next act of desperation is to recruit the player characters, who they never met until now, to retrieve the pieces of the Rod of Seven Parts as a way to defeat Vecna. I would change the story instead to start at level 1, with each player character being a protege of a powerful mentor. At a certain point in the leveling up advancement, the characters will gather special ingredients for their mentors, and the mentors will use all of their power to cast a super version of a wish spell to learn how to find the 7 pieces of the Sword of Cass and defeat Vecna. The result of the wish spell will be to identify the player characters as the instruments to solve the problem. Meanwhile, the act of casting this special wish spell left the mentors drained of their power. Perhaps Vecna noticed the spell in action and did something to drain even more of their power. I would make Cass part of the group of powerful non-player characters trying to find the Sword of Cass. Logically, Cass would insist to be involved, even while knowing that the other group members would be distrustful of him. At a certain point, predictably, Cass will betray the others. He will use a set of magical assassination darts equipped specifically with the names of each other mentor. The scene then is set on fire and all of the doors are locked. The bodies of the assassinated mentors begin to be incinerated, while the player characters could find a way to escape. At a later time, the player characters could learn how to create their own magical assassination dart, and they could use it to defeat Cass. In my version of the story, Cass can gain extra special power with each act of betrayal, and therefore he betrays the other mentors deliberately as his way of gaining enough power of his own to recover the pieces of the Sword of Cass and then to defeat Vecna. Alternatively, Vecna invaded into the wish spell and somehow captured the mentors. Vecna now can hold these mentors as prisoners while working on a way to drain their power as part of his intended ritual to alter all of reality. In any of these options, Cass inevitably would become corrupted by power and compelled to enact his own version of the reality-altering ritual or to do something else of terrible consequence. Several possibilities and adventuring pathways could develop. The player characters need to race against Vecna and against Cass to find the pieces of the Sword of Cass and to enact or to stop the reality-altering ritual. This kind of multi-pathway adventure can be amazing, but it is cumbersome for a pre-written adventure module and probably too unorthodox for an official campaign book. My version of this adventure will not work for everyone, and it might not be as fun or as effective as the official version of Vecna Eve of Ruin. I should stress that I like how this adventure book provides a reasonable sampling of the multiverse of Dungeons & Dragons. People can learn about the broad and diverse scope that the game can offer, and then potentially they can explore more of the parts that they like, or develop more of their own adventures. I probably will grab some parts of the pre-made maps and encounters, modify them, and drop them into other adventures. What are your thoughts about Vecna Eve of Ruin? Please share your ideas and suggestions in the comment section while being respectful about the creative process and about potential spoilers for people.